Looking back, I can't believe how naive I was to think things would ever truly be the same after the first time Lauren betrayed me. It was 2 years ago, and everything seemed perfect, or at least, as perfect as life can be when you're juggling careers, bills, and all the little annoyances of adulthood. We had been married for 6 years at that point, and I thought we were solid. I thought she was my rock. I had no idea that the cracks had been forming beneath the surface for months. It started like any other day. Lauren was in the shower, and I was in the kitchen making coffee, already in my routine. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and I absent-mindedly glanced over, expecting to see a notification from her mom or maybe her group chat with her college friends, but it wasn't. The message read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." I froze. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stared at those words for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of them. At first, I told myself it had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe it was a friend joking around, but who jokes like that? And the heart emoji, that wasn't casual. My hands were trembling when I picked up the phone. I hesitated for a moment, telling myself I shouldn't invade her privacy, but something deeper, a gnawing instinct, urged me on. I unlocked it. Lauren had given me her passcode years ago, back when we trusted each other completely, and opened the message thread. What I found destroyed me. The texts were graphic, explicit, and intimate in ways I hadn't seen from her in years. They weren't just about sex, they were about connection, about feelings, about him. His name was Matt, one of her co-workers. They had been meeting up for months, sneaking around while I sat at home thinking my wife was staying late at the office for work. There were references to hotels, to stolen kisses in the office parking lot, to nights spent together when she was supposed to be at a conference. I felt sick. My hands started shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. Every part of me wanted to smash it, to throw it against the wall, but instead, I just sat there, stunned and hollowed out. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. How could she do this? How could I not have seen it? How could I have been so stupid? When she got out of the shower, I was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in front of me. She immediately knew something was wrong. Maybe it was the look on my face. Maybe it was the silence. She opened her mouth to ask what was going on, but I cut her off. "Who the hell is Matt?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. The blood drained from her face. She tried to deny it at first, to play dumb, but I wasn't having it. I shoved the phone toward her, the messages open for her to see. Her excuses fell apart as quickly as they came, and within minutes, she was in tears. She begged me to listen, to understand. She swore it wasn't what it looked like, but when I pressed her, the truth came tumbling out. She admitted they had been seeing each other for months. She claimed it started innocently, that they were just friends who talked a lot at work, but it escalated. She swore she didn't mean for it to happen and told me over and over again that she still loved me, that she wanted to fix this. I was furious, devastated, but most of all, I felt betrayed in a way I'd never experienced before. The woman I trusted more than anyone else in the world, the person I thought I would grow old with, had shattered that trust. I wanted to walk out right then and there, but I couldn't. I loved her. God help me, I still loved her. The next few weeks were a blur of tears, shouting matches, and long, sleepless nights. Lauren swore she would never see him again. She blocked his number, quit her job, and even agreed to go to therapy. I told myself I could forgive her. People make mistakes, right? Relationships are messy, and love isn't always easy. So, I stayed. I chose to believe her when she said it was a one-time thing, a horrible lapse in judgment that would never happen again. Therapy helped, and for a while, I thought we had gotten through it. We worked on our marriage, tried to rebuild the trust. There were moments when I even felt grateful for what happened, thinking it forced us to confront things we had been avoiding. I convinced myself we were stronger than ever. But now, as I sit here writing this, I realize I was a fool. I wanted so badly to believe her, to believe in us, that I ignored the little doubts that lingered in the back of my mind. I ignored the cracks in her promises, the hesitation in her eyes when she said she'd never hurt me again. The first time she cheated, it broke me. What I didn't know then was that it was just the beginning. For a while, it felt like we were actually okay. Therapy helped us communicate better, or so I thought. Lauren was attentive, apologetic, and, at times, even overly affectionate. She went out of her way to reassure me. She gave me access to her phone without hesitation, shared her location, and did all the things a guilty spouse might do to regain trust. And for a time, it worked. I believed her. But as the months went by, the cracks started to reappear. It started small, little things that seemed off but were easy to dismiss. She began working late again, taking on projects that required her to spend extra time at the office. I told myself it was nothing, that she had learned her lesson, and that I shouldn't smother her with suspicion. She had promised me, after all, and we had come so far since the last time. but the doubts wouldn't leave me. One night, I came home to an empty house. Lauren had texted earlier, saying she had a last-minute meeting with a client and wouldn't be home until late. She didn't answer my calls or respond to my texts all evening. When she finally walked in close to midnight, she was flushed and jittery, as though she'd been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. "Rough day?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my stomach was in knots. "Exhausting," she replied, dropping her bag on the counter. "We had to go over the new campaign in detail. I'm wiped." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her so badly that I ignored the faint whiff of cologne that wasn't mine. I brushed off the way she avoided eye contact and the way her answers felt rehearsed. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was my own insecurities coming back to haunt me. After all, she had sworn she would never hurt me again. But the signs kept piling up. She started guarding her phone again, turning it face down when she set it on the table or keeping it with her even in the bathroom. Her explanations about her schedule became vague, peppered with inconsistencies. Sometimes, she'd say she was at work, but when I checked her location, it would show her somewhere else, always with an excuse ready. I remember one night in particular when the doubts became impossible to ignore. It was a Friday, and Lauren had left the house around 7 p.m., saying she was meeting some friends for drinks. I didn't think much of it at first. She needed space, and I didn't want to be the jealous, overbearing husband. But by 11 p.m., she still wasn't home, and she wasn't answering her phone. I called 3 times before she finally picked up, her voice rushed and distant. "Hey, sorry," she said. "It's really loud here. I'll be home soon." "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. "With Claire and the girls, just at a bar downtown." I could hear voices in the background, but something about the way she said it felt off. Her voice was shaky, and she hung up quickly, as though she didn't want me to ask more questions. When she got home around 1 a.m., I was still up, waiting for her. She looked disheveled but tried to play it off, smiling and telling me how much fun she had catching up with the girls. I noticed her makeup was smeared, and her blouse was buttoned wrong, but I didn't say anything. I was too afraid of what I might hear if I asked. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind or if she was slipping back into old habits. I wanted to trust her. I wanted so badly to believe that she had changed, that we had gotten past the worst of it. But deep down, I felt the familiar ache of betrayal creeping in again. The final straw came a few weeks later. Lauren mentioned she was going to a work event, a networking dinner that would run late. I didn't think much of it at first, but something about the way she said it made me suspicious. She was too casual, too dismissive when I asked for details. So, against my better judgment, I decided to check up on her. I drove to the venue she had mentioned, a small upscale restaurant in town. Her car was in the parking lot, and for a moment, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe she was really just working late, like she said. But then I saw them. Through the window, I spotted Lauren sitting in a dimly lit corner booth, her back to me. Across from her sat a man I didn't recognize. They were leaning in close, laughing softly, their faces just inches apart. My stomach turned as I watched her place a hand on his arm, the way she used to with me when we first started dating. I wanted to storm in, to confront her right then and there, but I froze. I felt like I was watching a nightmare play out in slow motion, helpless to stop it. I stayed there in my car, heart pounding, until they finally got up and left together, walking out of the restaurant side by side. They didn't see me as they got into his car and drove off. I sat there for what felt like hours, unable to move. All the trust one had rebuilt, all the hope I had clung to, it was gone. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Something was happening again, and this time, I couldn't pretend it was all in my head. This was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know how bad it would get. For the next few days, I carried the weight of what I had seen like a lead ball in my chest. I didn't confront Lauren right away. Part of me wanted to, desperately, but another part, the part that had been broken once already, hesitated. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that I wasn't imagining things, that she wasn't just networking or making new friends. I couldn't bear the thought of her spinning another lie to save herself, and me, foolishly, believing her again. So, I waited. I observed. I became someone I never thought I'd be, a husband spying on his wife. I started noticing her patterns more closely. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she would leave the house early, claiming she had yoga classes at a new studio across town. On weekends, she'd invent excuses to run errands that seemed to take hours longer than they should. She even started being more affectionate with me, which I now recognize as guilt disguised as love. I felt like I was living in some twisted version of our marriage, where everything looked fine on the surface but was rotting underneath. The breaking point came one Thursday night. Lauren was out at her supposed yoga class, and I couldn't shake the image of her with that man from the restaurant. I decided to check her location on my phone, something I hadn't done in a while because I'd promised myself I wouldn't be that paranoid husband anymore. But when I opened the tracker, I saw she wasn't at the yoga studio. She wasn't anywhere near it. She was at a house in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, watching her little dot sit unmoving at the same address. 1,000 scenarios ran through my mind, each worse than the last. I wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, but deep down, I knew better. I didn't even think before grabbing my keys and heading out the door. The drive felt surreal, like I was trapped in a foggy nightmare. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I would get there and find some mundane reason for her being there. Maybe she was meeting a friend, or maybe her car had broken down, but the closer I got, the more the pit in my stomach grew. When I pulled up to the house, her car was parked in the driveway, the lights inside were on, and I could see shadows moving through the curtains. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the house. I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to see what was waiting for me on the other side of that door, but I had to. I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. I walked up to the front door, my legs feeling like lead. As I approached, I could hear faint voices inside, muffled but unmistakable. I didn't knock. I didn't want to give them a chance to cover their tracks. Instead, I turned the doorknob, surprised to find it unlocked, and stepped inside. The voices grew louder as I moved through the entryway and into the living room, and that's when I saw them. Lauren was on the couch, her back arched, her body entwined with his. They didn't even notice me at first. They were too consumed by each other, too lost in their betrayal to realize they had just been caught. "Lauren," I said, my voice hoarse and trembling. They froze. She looked up at me, her face a mixture of shock and horror, while he scrambled to grab his clothes. For a moment, none of us moved. The room was filled with a deafening silence, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. "Alex," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice sharper now. "Don't you dare try to explain this." I turned and walked out before she could say anything else. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her lies, her pathetic attempts to salvage the unsalvageable. I got in my car and drove, tears streaming down my face as the reality of what I'd just witnessed sank in. She'd promised me it was a one-time mistake. She'd sworn on everything that mattered to her that she would never hurt me again. And yet, here we were. The second betrayal cut deeper than the first because this time, I'd given her the chance to rebuild my trust. I'd chosen to believe in her, in us, and she had destroyed it all over again. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. By the time I got home, I was numb. I sat in the dark, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. The love of my life, the woman I had fought so hard to forgive, had betrayed me again, and this time, there was no coming back from it. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was clear: my marriage was over. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Lauren letting herself into the house. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the entire night on the couch, replaying the scene over and over in my head. Her betrayal had burned itself into my mind, a wound that throbbed every time I thought about it. She called my name hesitantly, her voice shaky. "Alex." I didn't respond. Instead, I stayed seated, staring out the window, gripping the edge of the couch to keep myself grounded. She walked into the living room, her eyes swollen from crying, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Alex," she started again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what, Lauren?" I said coldly, finally looking at her. "What could you possibly say that would make last night okay?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not this time. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her emotions, not after what I'd seen. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice cracking. "It was a mistake." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare call it a mistake. Mistakes don't last for weeks or months or however long you've been sneaking around. A mistake doesn't have you lying to my face, night after night, while you're off screwing someone else." She flinched at my words, but I didn't stop. The floodgates had opened, and everything I'd been holding in poured out in a torrent of anger and pain. "I forgave you once, Lauren," I continued, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea how hard that was for me? Do you even care? I let you back into my heart. I trusted you, and this is what you do." She broke down sobbing, collapsing onto the armchair across from me. "I'm sorry," she cried, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know why I did it. I'm messed up. I don't know what's wrong with me." Her words hit me like a slap, not because they were honest, but because they were hollow. Empty excuses for a pattern of behavior she clearly had no intention of changing. I stood up, towering over her as she cowered in the chair. "You didn't care about hurting me when you were sneaking around with him," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You only care now because you got caught." Her sobs grew louder, but I turned away, unable to look at her anymore. I couldn't stand the sight of her, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd fought for, reduced to this. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly, my back to her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I mean I'm done, Lauren. We're done." She shot up from the chair, rushing toward me. "No, Alex, please," she begged, grabbing my arm. "Don't say that. We can fix this. We can go back to therapy. I'll do anything, I swear, anything to make it right." I pulled my arm away from her, stepping back as though her touch burned me. "You can't fix this," I said firmly. "You made your choice, Lauren, twice, and both times, it wasn't me." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost, but then I remembered the look on her face the night before, the way she had laughed and touched him, and any trace of sympathy vanished. "I'll pack my things," I said, my voice flat. "I'll stay at a friend's until I can figure out my next steps." "Please, Alex," she whimpered, "don't leave. I love you." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You don't love me, Lauren. You love the idea of me, the safety, the stability, but love doesn't look like this." With that, I walked upstairs, grabbed a duffel bag, and began throwing clothes into it. Lauren followed me, crying and pleading, but I tuned her out. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling as I shoved everything I could into the bag. When I was done, I slung it over my shoulder and walked out the door without looking back. I spent the next few days crashing on my friend Jeremy's couch. He didn't ask many questions, just handed me a beer and let me sit in silence. I was grateful for that. I wasn't ready to explain what had happened, not to him, not to anyone. I barely even understood it myself. But as the days turned into weeks, the reality began to sink in. My marriage was over. The life I had built with Lauren, the future I had imagined for us, it was gone. She had destroyed it, and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive her for that. Lauren tried to reach out a few times, sending long, apologetic texts and leaving tearful voicemails. I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy to engage with her lies anymore. This time, there was no going back, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: I wouldn't let her hurt me again. The first few weeks after I left Lauren were a blur. I drifted between numbness and heartbreak, between moments of quiet resolve and waves of crushing despair. I was staying on Jeremy's couch, but it didn't feel like a place to heal. It was just somewhere to hide. Lauren kept reaching out, her texts alternating between pleas for forgiveness and angry accusations. As if somehow my leaving was the real betrayal, I ignored them all. I couldn't afford to let her words worm their way back into my head, convincing me to stay in a situation I knew was toxic. But moving on wasn't as simple as cutting her off. The memories of her, both the good and the bad, haunted me everywhere I went. Every corner of my mind felt contaminated by her lies, by the false promises she'd whispered in the dark when I thought we were rebuilding. I went back to therapy, but this time, it was for me, not for us. At my first session, I poured everything out: the first betrayal, the promises she'd made, and how she'd shattered them all over again. My therapist, a calm, empathetic woman named Dr. Harris, listened patiently before asking, "Why do you think you stayed after the first time?" Her question hit me like a freight train. I'd been so focused on what Lauren had done that I hadn't stopped to ask myself why I let it happen again. "I guess I wanted to believe her," I said after a long pause. "I wanted to believe that people can change, that love can fix things." "Do you still believe that?" she asked. I hesitated, then shook my head. Not with her, not anymore. Over the next few sessions, we unpacked the pieces of my marriage: how I had ignored the red flags because I was too afraid to lose her, how I had let her guilt me into forgiving her because I wanted so badly to believe in the version of her I thought I knew. Dr. Harris didn't sugarcoat it. Lauren's actions were hers alone, but I had allowed myself to be manipulated, and as painful as it was to admit, she was right. Slowly, I started taking steps to rebuild my life. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a modest one-bedroom that felt empty and quiet at first, but also like a fresh start. I started cooking for myself again, rediscovering the little joys I'd let slip away during my marriage. Jeremy, bless his heart, dragged me out of my funk when I needed it most. He'd show up unannounced with beer and takeout, insisting we watch old action movies or play video games like we used to in college. He didn't push me to talk about Lauren, but he was there when I did. His quiet support a lifeline I didn't realize I needed. Lauren, meanwhile, didn't let up. She kept sending texts, leaving voicemails, even showing up at my new place once. I didn't let her in. Instead, I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, as she cried and begged me to give her another chance. "I've changed, Alex," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear, I'll do whatever it takes. Just come home." I looked at her, really looked at her, and all I felt was exhaustion. "Lauren," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I gave you everything I had, twice, and both times. You threw it away. I can't do this anymore." Her face crumpled, and she tried to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Please don't contact me again. I need to move on, and so do you." I closed the door before she could say anything else. On the other side, I heard her sobbing quietly before she finally left. That moment was the closest I'd come to closure, but it wasn't the end of my healing. It would take months, maybe even years, to rebuild my sense of trust, not just in others, but in myself. As time passed, I started to feel like myself again. I focused on my work, took up running to clear my head, and even reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage. Slowly but surely, I was reclaiming my life. One night, Jeremy invited me to a bar with a group of his friends. I was reluctant at first, worried it would feel forced, but I went, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. Lauren's shadow still lingered. Of course, it's hard to erase 6 years of memories, no matter how badly they ended, but each day, the ache in my chest grew a little lighter. The person I used to be, the one who believed in love and loyalty, wasn't gone. He was just buried, waiting to rise again, and while I wasn't ready to open my heart to someone new yet, I knew that one day, I would be. Because if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that I deserve better, and I won't settle for anything less. It's been nearly a year since I left Lauren, a year of heartbreak, growth, and rediscovery. I've come a long way from the broken man sitting on Jeremy's couch, questioning everything I thought I knew about love and trust. The pain of what Lauren did still lingers sometimes, like an old wound that aches on rainy days, but it no longer controls me. In the early days, I thought closure would come from her. I thought maybe one day she'd say the right words, offer the right apology, and somehow undo the damage. But now I know closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you, it comes from within. Lauren tried to contact me a few more times after I told her to stop. Her messages became less frequent over time, fading into silence. The last one came 6 months ago. It was short, just 3 words, "I'm truly sorry." I didn't respond. By then, I had learned that her words, no matter how sincere they might seem, would never erase what she'd done. Forgiveness doesn't always mean letting someone back into your life. Sometimes, it just means letting go of the anger so you can free yourself. I've built a new routine, a new normal. My apartment, once cold and unfamiliar, feels like home now. I've decorated it with little pieces of myself, a bookshelf filled with my favorite novels, a guitar I've started playing again after years of neglect, photos of my family and friends. Jeremy and I still hang out often, though these days, I see him less as a crutch and more as a brother. He's been my rock through all of this, but he's also encouraged me to stand on my own. A few months ago, I joined a hiking group. It started as a way to fill my weekends, but it's become something I genuinely look forward to. There's something about being out in nature, surrounded by mountains and trees, that feels grounding, healing. That's where I met Rachel. She was new to the group, just like me, and we ended up walking together during one of the hikes. She was easy to talk to, funny, kind, and refreshingly honest. There was no pretense, no hidden agenda, just a genuine connection. We've been seeing each other casually, taking things slow. I was upfront with her about my past, about what I'd been through, and she's been nothing but understanding. She told me about her own heartbreaks, her own lessons learned, and it felt like we were meeting each other at just the right time in our lives. I don't know where things with Rachel will go, and for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. I've learned not to rush things, not to cling to the idea of what a relationship should be. For now, I'm just enjoying the moments as they come. As for Lauren, I've heard through mutual friends that she's moved out of the city. I don't know where she is or what she's doing, and honestly, I don't care. Her chapter in my life is closed, and I have no interest in reopening it. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I was a fool for forgiving her the first time, but I've realized it wasn't foolish, it was hopeful. I wanted to believe in love, in redemption, and while that hope was misplaced with Lauren, it's not something I regret, it's part of who I am. The difference now is that I know my worth, I know what I deserve, and I'll never settle for less again. The man who walked out of Lauren's house that night was shattered, a shell of himself, but the man I am today is stronger, wiser, and finally free. Life has a funny way of breaking you apart. only to rebuild you into something better. And as I stand here now, looking out at the horizon on my latest hike with Rachel by my side, I feel something I never thought I'd feel again: peace. Because in the end, life goes on, and so do I.